So in the last video, I made the claim that the Exodus and Joshua's conquest all took place during the Middle Bronze Age at the Phase 2 AB transition, and that this took place in the calendar year of 1446 BC, just as the Bible tells us. I attributed this 300-year discrepancy in the Bible's dating to an error in Egyptian history that has shifted the chronology of the Bible 300 years earlier, and I promised to show this error in other cultures across the ancient world in order to prove my point. The example I want to start with is unusual but perfect, as it demonstrates the 300-year error whilst highlighting the time period in Egypt that has caused the error, which is the length of the third intermediate period. So the history of Nubia is going to be my first example. To give a brief understanding on Nubian history, we have to take into account that the chronology of Nubia prior to the 25th dynasty is entirely dependent on Egyptian synchronism. This is important as the 21st to the 25th dynasty of Egypt make up what we know as the third intermediate period, which has been incorrectly extended by 300 years. I have done videos in the past explaining how this has happened and how it can be fixed, but for now let's see what impact that had on Nubian history. During the Egyptian New Kingdom, Nubia became an Egyptian dependency, so that's from the 18th dynasty through to the end of the 20th dynasty. For context, this would be during the Late Bronze Age, at a time I have said would cover the Late Judges period through to the United Monarchy period of Israel. What you need to understand is that the 21st to the 24th dynasties of Egypt were under Libyan rule, and that the 25th dynasty was under Nubian control. The scholar Kenneth Kitchen believed that these dynasties ran one after the other instead of parallel to each other as the evidence shows, which created a problem for Nubian history. The period between the end of the viceregal administration that the Nubians were under during the last years of the 20th dynasty and the first datable inscription of the 25th dynasty in the 8th century BC has created one of the most significant gaps in Nubian history. The archaeologist William Adams said Nubia vanished entirely from history. Its erstwhile Egyptian conquerors had returned to their native soil, and the indigenous population had retreated somewhere into the wilderness of Upper Nubia, whence they were to emerge with a vengeance 3 centuries later. So here we have a 300-year dark age directly brought about because of the extension of the third intermediate period and Nubia's reliance on Egyptian synchronism. And I always have to point out, this means no archaeological evidence whatsoever, no burials in the cemeteries and no sedimentary layers built up in the ground. A dark age literally means that everyone would have to have disappeared from the land, returning 300 years later, apparently preserving all the customs they did from 300 years earlier, and that's without bringing up the rapid depopulation and repopulation that would have occurred at the end of the dark age. In preparing for this video, I was considering focusing on Nubia alone and demonstrating that there was no dark age or gap between the end of the viceregal administration and the rise of the kingdom of Kuru. However, I'll save a full explanation for future videos I do on the third intermediate period, so subscribe to be informed of when I do. Now let's take a look at what problems this created in Elamite culture. Shutruk Nahunte II was king of Elam from 717 to 699 BC, and he left several cuneiform inscriptions which were excavated in Susa. One of these Elamite language texts lists his 3 close predecessors. However, in the conventional dating scheme, these kings span over 3 centuries. From the text, Shutruk is carrying out a building project for the god Inshushinak and implies that the former kings have left the completion of the building down to him. First he names his father, Ubanimena II, who reigned from circa 760 BC. But then he goes on to name 2 kings normally dated to circa 1100 BC, Huteldush Inshushinak and his brother, Silhanihamu Lakama. Scholars have tried to explain this anomaly away by claiming that there may have been another pair of brothers who took on the names of the brother kings from centuries earlier, but this explanation makes a lot less sense when we observe many other historical figures in ancient times seemingly dated 300 years earlier than they should be, as I demonstrated in my last video using Joshua as an example. So now let's look at the mystery of the Sea Peoples. In Ramesses Medinet Habu proclamation, he lists the 6th group of invaders. But for the sake of time, I'll focus on one group in particular, the Sherden or Shardana. To give you a brief overview of who they were, their original homeland was probably Sardis in the region that would be later known as Lydia, but was originally known as Mysia. These warriors were depicted on both sides of the battle in the Sea People's attack on Ramesses III. We have evidence from Sardinia that shows that they have a connection with the Shardana. The Nuragit culture produced bronzes of their warriors wearing horned helmets and carrying long shields and spears, just as the Shardana from Egypt. The oldest inscription found in Sardinia is from the Nora stone, which was written in Phoenician script and thus dated to the 9th century BC. The inscription gives the earliest names of the island, which is Bet Shardan, which translated means the children of Shardan. This confirms the link between the two groups. However, within the conventional chronology, it places them over 3 centuries apart, thus creating another Dark Age. Where were they for the 300 years since the attack on Ramesses? They couldn't possibly have been at sea for 300 years. All of these errors occurred when it was decided to synchronize all ancient cultures with that of Egypt's. This was made possible because of the pottery dating method initiated by Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie. While his pottery dating method was correct, the Egyptian timeline he started with was incorrect. So when Petrie established the dates for the Mycenaean Late Bronze Age, this is what led to the most recognized Dark Age of all the ancient world, the Greek Dark Age. At first, Greek historians such as Cecil Tor argued against the idea of a Greek Dark Age, as all historians prior to Petrie's announcement believed that the heroic age of Homer's Greece was followed immediately by the historical age, which consists of the archaic and classical periods. Once again, I will have to save any archaeological evidence for a future video, but I am going to give 2 literary examples to show the ancient poets had no knowledge of the Dark Age prior to Petrie's assertion. Virgil's poem The Aeneid is about a relationship between the hero of the Trojan War and Dido, the founder of Carthage. Within the conventional chronology, these 2 events are separated by over 3 centuries. To make a comparison, this would be like somebody creating a Netflix show about an affair between Michelle Obama and George Washington, with no mention of time travel for either of them. Of course an author could choose to do so, but it's more likely Virgil believed that Aeneas and Dido were contemporaries. There's even an archaeological clue to back up this claim. The Wenamon papyrus of the late New Kingdom of Egypt tells of an envoy being sent to Sakarbas to obtain wood for a temple construction. Sakarbas, which translates into Zakar Baal, is the first husband of Dido. He was murdered before she fled to Carthage. Now, of course, scholars have said that the Zakar Baal of the Wenamon papyrus is distinct from the husband of Dido because of the 300-year gap, but I'm sure from this video alone you are starting to see a pattern emerge. But back to the classical poets. Homer's writings give us the biggest clue that there was no Greek Dark Age. In the Odyssey, the sons of Heracles visit an oracle who tells them that they must wait 3 generations, that's about 70 years, before they will be able to succeed in conquering the Peloponnese. Homer is retelling of events that happened right after the Trojan War. Why would he have an oracle in his story prophesy that the sons of Heracles and their Dorian allies would return to the Peloponnese in 70 years if conventional history shows the Dorian invasion happened over 3 centuries later? By the time Homer's play was written in the Linear B text, they would have had time to spot this chronological error and change the text, meaning Homer did not recognize the Greek Dark Age in his writings in the same way that Virgil did not. There are so many more examples across the ancient world that I would like to go through, along with a few more from the Bible that I didn't touch on in the last video. But I think that I'm going to end this here as it's a good place to stop. And maybe I'll do a shorter video next week, tying it all back in with what I've done over the last 2 videos. Please like the video and share it with anyone you believe needs to hear this, and subscribe and click the bell so that you don't miss the next video. All praises to the Most High.